All right, so we're going to talk about significant figures in calculations today. This is going to be a real brief lesson, and you already know half of what I'm going to talk about today. So when we have some kind of calculation, like in this previous assignment, let's say we have 50.0% of 245 grams. All right. Now, in order to calculate this, what we have to do is we have to multiply the decimal form of the percent. And notice there's 3 sig figs here, so I retained 3 sig figs when I changed it to a decimal. And I have to multiply that by 245. So, if we do that, 0.5 times 245, we get 122.5. All right, 122.5. Now, what we would do, and when we're doing calculations, I've always told you use the fewest number of sig figs in any of the measurements that were given, right? And so we have 3 here, so I have to have 3 in my answer. And just once again, there is 3 here, 3 sig figs, 1, 2, 3, and 3 sig figs here, right? 1, 2, 3. So I need 1, 2, 3. I can only have 3, so that is going to be an answer of 123 grams. We round that, right? Now, that technically only applies, that the fewest number of sig figs only applies when we're multiplying or dividing. Okay, so if we do any multiplying or dividing, then you take the fewest number of sig figs. Now, most of our calculations involve multiplying or dividing. So let's just make a little note here. So when multiplying or dividing, use the fewest number of sig figs involved in the question. So that's for multiplying or dividing. And if you do that in any part of the question, that's what you do. The other thing is, what happens about adding and subtracting, right? And so we look at adding and subtracting, and so what happens when we're adding or subtracting only? Well, this is in your textbook as well. If you look up the appendix, significant figures in calculations, in the very back of your textbook, you can go ahead and look at that right now. All right, so in your physics textbook, page 818, it gives an example here of adding measurements only. And what do you do with significant figures in adding measurements? So let's do an example, 6.6 meters, and we're adding to that 18.74 meters, and we're adding 0.766 meters, okay? So if you guys remember, when you're adding numbers, and this is what you used to do when you were in elementary school, when you're adding numbers, you keep the decimal point all lined up vertically, right? And this right here is the ones column, right? And this is the tenths column, and so on. And so you kind of keep everything lined up vertically. When you're adding or subtracting only, it looks like this. When you're adding or subtracting, you would fill in zeros basically here, wouldn't you? And let's move that M over there. And so you'd add, and you'd have 6 here, and you'd have 10 there with the number 1 come up. 7, 7 is 14, 21, 2, put the decimal place there. 8 and 8 is 16, put the 1 up there, and that's 2. Okay? So 26.106 meters. Now, when it comes to your final answer and wondering about sig figs, okay, it's not the same as multiplication, all right? You don't worry about the fewest number of sig figs only. That's not what you're worried about. What you're worried about is the precision here. See how I added these zeros? Those zeros weren't there to begin with. And so really, if you think about it, this measurement was only precise to 1 decimal place. And I'm still working on my recording program here. It's really Not very handy to change colors or anything. But we only have one decimal place, and that's not a very precise answer. When you're adding, what you have to do is consider the fewest number of decimal places. And so the fewest number of decimal places here is 1 decimal place. And so you don't consider sig figs, but what you consider is the fewest number of decimal places. And so 6.6 would have the smallest precision when it comes to decimal places. So your answer has to be taken to 1 decimal place. It doesn't matter about the numbers in front. So this would be 26.1. Which is a bit different than multiplying because this only has 2 sig figs, so if we were multiplying, then the answer should only have 2. But in this case, it's the decimal place. So let's just summarize that with some. So, once again, when adding or subtracting, when that's all you're doing, the answer should have the fewest number of decimal places that was used in any of the measurements in the question. And so this one we said had 2 sig figs, but it only has 1